Oh, okay. Well, we are back. So once again, little technical difficulties. Thank you for tuning into the Ruckus again. This is Giandra, and I'm joined by Steve Farhood. How are you doing tonight, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
The pleasure is all ours. And, of course, I'm joined by Ryan Bivens. Ryan, how are you tonight?
I'm pretty good.
Here, fresh out the gym, I'm sure. So why don't we dive right into it? As we know, for those of you tuning in, you probably tuned into this past weekend's triple header on Showtime, capped off by Robert Guerrero against Guerrero-Kamegai. I'm going to start off with Steve Farhood. We had three very different matches, very entertaining, nothing too dull for the broadcast. Starting off with Devin Alexander versus Jesus Soto-Karass. As you called you probably have the most lengthy career of all the commentators on the desk, and you've seen Jesus Soto-Karass fight a number of years in these battles. Did he fare against Devin Alexander like you thought he would?
Yeah, Jesus Soto-Karass is pretty consistent. He's always going to bring it. To me, the fight was all about Devin Alexander, because if he had lost or not fought well, it sounds a little dramatic to say, but he was really fighting for his career in essence, and it was really critical that he get a win, because the welterweight division today is so competitive that, it's easy to forget a couple of fights ago people were talking about Devin for Floyd Mayweather. And then,
right.
He loses one fight and albeit badly, he loses one fight, and he's out of the picture. So it was a critical fight for him, and I think he extended his career. He fought well. He faded a little bit in the end. But Jesus Soto-Karass brought it, and I thought it was a little closer fight than the official judges had it.
When we look at now with Devin Alexander, so I agree, essentially was fighting for his life to get back into the mix. What happens to him now? He was formerly a title holder. He was in those long talks back and forth with Amir Khan for a possible title shot, and then that all went to pieces. Now he finds his way trying to regain ground in such a packed division. Will he become now an opponent that is dusted and overlooked because he's so high risk and little reward, or how do you map out a career for him from here forward?
Yeah, I think he'll get another big fight. The division is so thick and so deep that there's opportunity for everybody. I mean, Sean Porter obviously is not the question for him. Would Keith Thurman be a good matchup? Perhaps. A little dangerous. I don't think anybody really wants to fight Keith Thurman. Obviously, Mayweather is still a ways away for Devin. Devin's problem is, I think, that too many people, too many fans, and perhaps insiders as well, view him as a very, very good boxer who's not always that exciting. And for the first half of the fight against Soto-Karass, he fought very exciting. He was very aggressive. He's not really a puncher. And then in the second half, he faded to sort of re-emphasize that criticism that some people have of him.
Do you think that, he mentioned, and when I interviewed him for Boxing Channel this week, he wanted to fight in explosive fashion. He said that in, a variety of media outlets and the hype leading up to the fight. Is Devin Alexander capable of an exciting ending? I asked him if he thought he was going to get the knockout. He said he was going to look for it, but is he even capable of finishing off anyone notable that way? Aside from
he can be exciting, Giandra, but I don't think he can be explosive. That's just not his style. One thing I've always noticed about Devin, as good a boxer as he is and as quick as he is, when he punches, watch tape of him or watch him next time he fights. When he punches, I always get the impression that he's punching at his target, not through it. And I think that's one of the reasons he doesn't have more knockdowns and more knockouts. So he can be exciting when he's aggressive and when he boxes aggressively, but let's not confuse him with any kind of big puncher, because that's just not him.
Right. Shifting gears to the next card, the next fight that appeared on the card, Gary Russell Jr. versus Vasily Lomachenko. Very anticipated matchup. It was probably the fight I most wanted to see on the card. Gary Russell Jr. finally takes a step against someone who's not named TBA, and similarly, what happened to Nonito Donaire when he fought Rigondeaux, he finds himself dismantled by someone, although who doesn't have as many professional bouts as he, someone who just kind of picked him apart and broke his body down and took him out. On your leading up in the fighter meetings, Gary Russell Jr. felt that Vasily Lomachenko was just somebody, just a stepping stone. Did that fight end like you thought it would?
Well, I really I was like you, Giandra. I was looking forward to that fight more than any other on the card because it was a battle of philosophies as much as it was a battle of fighters. The guys have so much in common, both southpaws, both Olympians, both trained by their fathers, yet their path to the fight couldn't have been more different. And Russell in the fighter meetings was very sure that Lomachenko had taken the wrong attitude and the wrong approach by fighting so quickly for the title. And then Russell, felt that the win would validate his own method of getting there, which was to take, pretty easy fights and never really face any kind of adversity. So, if anything, I think Lomachenko proved that he's really special. Gary Russell proved that as special as he is, and he is very gifted and very fast, he was just beaten by a better fighter. So I don't think even if Gary Russell had fought tougher guys along the way, I don't think he would have beaten Lomachenko. Lomachenko was just stronger, more aggressive. Gary Russell didn't let go with his when he did punch, he had very little on his punches. He was going for speed more than power, and I think ultimately that hurt him very badly in the fight.
Going through all the media events during the course of the fight week, the thing that was very telling for me was Gary Russell Jr. saying he never envisioned himself as a world champion, and that kind of put a red flag up for me as a sign of a lack of passion. Does he have that lack of passion, or not to take anything away from how Lomachenko performed in the ring, but how much of Gary Russell's skills is just a lot of fast hands and glitz, and how much of it is actually substance when he performs in the ring?
Well, that's a great question. The question is passion, because I hadn't really thought about that before, but that might be a legitimate question. I do know that from talking to him, and, he turned pro on Showbox, and he's fought on Showbox 3 times, 4 times. He's fought on championships. I know Gary Russell pretty well. I will say that he was always cocksure of himself about his methods, about his skills, and I think that for that reason, because he was so sure of himself and the method to use, this loss is going to be pretty difficult for him to absorb, and I'll be very curious to see what happens to him the rest of his career. He's good enough to get another shot. There are other fighters you can pick, in the featherweight division to get a shot against. He doesn't have to fight Donaire. He doesn't have to fight Lomachenko again. But I'll be very curious to see how he handles this loss. It could be a little more difficult for him than it would be for another fighter.
There's no question that he has superior hand speed compared to most fighters in the landscape. How much of that skill is still kind of amateurish? Because by focusing on the fast hands and thinking that fans want to see, in amateurs is about how many times you strike and how many points you score. Would it be
right?
Would it behoove him to maybe go in a different direction in terms of training after training in a certain style and already having that mindset that he didn't want to be a champion? It's because in that regard, it almost was like he's still performing as an amateur fighter.
Yeah, well, he certainly looked more of the amateur style against Lomachenko. But let's not forget that against inferior opposition prior to the Lomachenko fight, he scored some sensational one-punch knockouts. So this is a guy, especially with the right hook. So, it's not like he doesn't have power, but he's going to have to prove that he can use that power against world-class opposition, which he hasn't done yet. So I think he does have the power. Speed is power, but he's going to have to show it against better opposition, and even more so now because of the fact that he came up empty against Lomachenko.
And then, of course, capping the night off, another war. Something about the StubHub Arena air just brings just the madness out in the ring. Robert Guerrero versus Guerrero-Kamegai. Explosive, just beating the hell out of each other for the duration of the fight. Robert Guerrero, I'm a fitness aficionado. I like to work out, and, I look at CrossFit. I'm not a CrossFitter, but knowing what I know, I didn't see where that made all the difference. He looked in phenomenal shape, but do you see this new training regimen that he's attributed so much newfound success to? Was it really beneficial to him in his preparation for this fight against Kamegai? Is that something, did he look any different than he did, say, against Mayweather or against even Andre Berto?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of conditioning, he was in good shape because he threw an amazing amount of punches. With that said, the problem he had nothing to do with conditioning. It had everything to do with strategy and style because every round he seemed to come out trying to box, and he couldn't maintain that strategy and ended up fighting Kamegai's fight. And the funny thing about that, Giandra, is that was a fight I was not particularly looking forward to, in all honesty, because I had seen Kamegai on Show Extreme. I called this fight with Johan Perez, and He got outboxed very easily in a fight he's supposed to win. So it's all style. Just goes to show you how every fight is different. And in a brawl, Kamegai is about as tough as anybody. And Guerrero just, one of the reasons I love him is because he's a pure fighter. Even when he is better off boxing, he doesn't do it and he brawls, and that's why he's so fan-friendly.
Right. I mean, he's definitely, a blood and guts competitor. Now looking at he took some pretty good knockings upside the head from Kamegai, and as we've noticed with other fighters, scar tissue and all these things prove to be a factor, like with Antonio Margarito. And it looked like he took a lot of punishment on the one side of his face. He took punishment, I think, on the same side in the fight against Mayweather. It'll be interesting to see how he progresses from here on forward. I'm going to throw it over to my gentleman here. I'll start with Ryan Bivens. Anything you want to lob out while we're recapping this card?
Yeah. I got a question for Steve. Big fan of yours. I thought you one of the most knowledgeable announcers on Showtime. I was wondering what switched you over from calling the live action to mostly being a unofficial judge.
Well, that's what Showtime wants me to do. I mean, I do analyze for Showbox, and I do analyze for Show Extreme, but Al Bernstein's about as good as there is doing that, and so is Paulie. Paulie's been such a find as a broadcaster that I'm very happy with my role as a scorer, and I contributed in a little bit of other ways as well. So it's a good team. I think Showtime changed the dynamics of the broadcast team about 2 years ago, and I think it's really worked out well.
Okay.
Ismail, anything for Steve before we have to wrap him up?
Definitely. Steve, being that you've been around for so long and, seen different fighters come and go, and a lot of people like to compare eras as far as different fighters who could be better in this era. Well, one thing I wanted to focus on is actually the judging. We've seen a lot of crazy scores lately from a lot of judges. So I wanted to get your perspective. Do you think the judging that we see now is at its lowest point that it's been in, let's say, the last couple of decades as far as accurate scoring?
That's a great question. It does seem like there have been more controversial scores in recent years, maybe even the last 2 or 3 years. Some of that is perhaps preventable. For instance, I don't think C.J. Ross ever should have been given the Canelo Mayweather fight coming off, which he did with Pacquiao and Bradley. But for the most part, I think people forget that scoring is incredibly subjective, and there are always going to be some some scores that look very, very off base, and I don't point it toward I point it toward just subjectivity. People have differences of opinion. We saw it with the Algieri and Provodnikov fight very recently. So yeah, we're gonna have more of those. It's not going to stop. Remember, we have more title fights than we've ever had, so there are more high-profile fights than there have ever been. And you go back in years, believe me, it's always been this way. I really don't think it's all that much different. Maybe a few more in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And before we wrap it up, let me ask you one more quick question.
Sure.
There's so many boxing websites now, ranging from investigative journalism or opinion-based writing. Do you feel that media coverage is balanced? And if you don't feel it is, what type of writing do we need to see more from the current boxing media?
Well, the Internet has changed everything. And there's more of an emphasis today than there's ever been on getting the news out there, getting information out there quickly. Unfortunately, I think some of the principles of journalism have fallen by the wayside because of that. And I think there's more of a tendency to just listen to the loudest voice and the earliest voice instead of the calmest voice and the most objective voice. So, yeah, it bothers me a little bit because I'm old school, and I'm a trained journalist, and I think a lot of the people on the Internet aren't. And I just think that people today, fans today, and whether you're reading about politics or news or boxing or whatever, you just have to come to the understanding very early in the game that everything I read is not necessarily correct. It's not gospel, and there's a lot of opinion out there.
Absolutely. Ryan, one more question, and then we'll thank Steve for his time with us.
All right. Gary Russell Jr. How do you think his career goes on from here? Does he turn it around like a Glenn Johnson, or does he kind of phase into a Howard Davis Jr. career?
That's a great question. I think you can make an argument for both ways. I mean, I think Gary Russell Jr. is way too talented to have this be the highlight of his career. I think he'll get more opportunities. Let's not forget that he's promoted by Golden Boy, the number one biggest promoter in the game. There are other champions to shoot for. You can become a champion today without being the number one guy in your division, and right now Russell certainly isn't that. So I think he'll be okay, but he's going to have to absorb this defeat and look inward a little bit and say, why did I get beat? What was my method, wrong getting to this point? And it's going to take a lot of soul searching, and who knows what kind of answer he'll find and whether he'll accept the answer. So that only time will tell, but I'll be very curious to watch the rest of his career.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.
Well, I thank you very, very much, Steve, for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Maybe one time when you have a little more time, you can come and do the roundtable with us. That's always an interesting show.
Sure, I'd love to.
All right. Well, thank you very much once again, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. That was Steve Farhood from Showtime. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be with Demetrius Andrade.